swan boats and daisy chains. Can't seem to recall my true given name. I see my footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that yesterday or only a moment ago? My heart is gone. I've gone cold. My heart is gone.
Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 83.
Crickets from Dave.
Crickets from Dave. We actually pause where I normally don't because it usually is going to lead to Bruce Hornsby.
I was about to say, do we have cricket music?
We should. We should have had some cricket music because Dave is MIA. There's no Dave.
Again.
Nowhere to be found, nowhere to be seen.
We actually didn't even hear back from him. We hope you're alive, Dave. If you hear this, we hope you're alive. We're not sure, but you know.
We have no confirmation.
We have no confirmation, but that's okay because this is going to be a really, really great podcast even without our buddy Dave. Let's talk about what we got going on. Ping, Michelle, they're here. They showed up. They answered.
The ladies are always here.
In a timely fashion.
Yeah, actually, Ping was early, bugging me. Like, come on, I'm ready. And I'm like, give me a break.
Well, because I missed the last one because I happened to be overseas and it was just not possible.
Yeah.
So I have to make up for it.
She put shooting things in front of us, Michelle.
That's actually pretty cool. I can't argue.
No, you should argue it.
I had to defend my second place title. I actually wanted to be first, but the woman who won first place for women's well-deserved it.
You should have tied into the podcast while you were shooting things. Now that would have been pretty epic.
And then people have been like, what's that sound back there? What's that sound? Every once in a while I hear this popping sound.
And we would have just said, Ping is killing things while on the podcast. And that would be like a normal podcast.
People aren't fearful enough of Ping without, knowing that she's a crack shot.
I would like to think that over the years, it's been a few years since I've been a black hat and been a few years since, I've had to do the dragon eyes and the fire breathing thing, that maybe that impression has worn off.
So would you like that to have worn off though? Because I think it's a good thing for people to be fearful of you.
I think it's good too. But I think that there might be a generation in a few years who won't remember what it's like to have to come to the desk with their head hanging low because they'd either not gotten us their information or not turned in their presentation or some other offense.
Because, we've got reputations to maintain here.
No, we need to throw a show together, you and I.
Well, it's okay. Some of our employees are afraid of Michelle.
They'd be a lot more favorite if they saw her in action at a show with me and the images that we have.
They're afraid of her and they've never seen her in action. I mean, we're doing quarterly reviews and people are afraid of Michelle.
It's a good day if I can make people cry.
Yeah.
That's because you thrive on the tears of babes.
I thrive on pain. It is true.
Well, that was a nice reunion. I miss Dave. I actually longed for Bruce Hornsby right there.
No, you don't. It would annoy you.
No, I don't. I'm going to cut that part out. I don't know why I even said that. I'm punching myself right now. So, Michelle, we probably should mention training, even though everything for the year is sold out.
Do you have training scheduled for 2017? Maybe mention when you're going to have the schedule out for that.
Yes. So that is a good point because we are finalizing it and it will be ready by Black Hat time, but it is not ready yet.
So that's a big fat TBA.
Yes.
As in, haven't gotten around to it yet.
Well, we were saying
no,
not completed. I could tell you this for sure. There will be one master's level course in Orlando. There will be 3 APSE courses and at least 2 OSINT courses next year. That is definitely, I can tell you that. But now the when, where, why, and how, that I cannot tell you just yet.
You actually have a plan in place. It's getting better than just deciding willy-nilly you're going to throw a class.
Of course. What do you mean? Of course we have a plan.
Speaking loosely, we have a plan.
We have a plan. 3 years ago.
You have a framework.
3 years ago, we decided 4 APSEs and all of that was too much. So we decided we wanted to bring it down to a level where Michelle and I weren't hating the idea of training. So 3 APSEs, 1 MLSE, 2 OSINTs. That's enough that we don't hate our life. Because of that. We hate our life for other reasons, but not because of that. We will be out at Black Hat training. That class is completely sold out. I am sorry for all the people who continually email me every day asking me to open up another slot for them. I cannot. The rooms have already been set. Our room is completely packed, and we cannot add more people to the room.
And more importantly, we cannot clone Chris or Michelle or any of the other
We
staff.
would not want to do that, first of all. But we couldn't, even if we could. My only suggestion is next year, sign up before 2 weeks before the class.
But something that people can still do is come see us at the SE Village at DEFCON.
What? SE Village?
Yay.
Yay.
Yeah, so you go and get your 2-day break before you go to DEFCON and have 3 full days. Is it 3 or 4 full days?
4 now, because we are one of the only villages running a Thursday event, Mission SE Impossible. We hired a guy that is like a maker at heart, and we put him to task to make us tons of things that will make what we did last year look like a joke, because we have like amazing laser arrays and motion sensors and sensitivity sensors, and basically they're going to have to, get out of handcuffs and traverse lasers and pick a safe and all sorts of fun stuff.
Does anyone have to sign a waiver?
No, we're not doing any waivers, but what we did last year, which we'll probably do again this year, is you sign up on site. So you can't sign up on the website. You have to come in and sign up in person. And we had so many signups. I think it was Amanda or Michelle, one of the 2 women geniuses, came up with this great idea that we take all the names and put them in a hat, and we pick the first 10, and those are the ones who compete, because we had like 125 signups. Yeah, and we can only do it for like 6 hours that day or something. So,
well, I was hoping you'd have like a Crocodile Crossing.
It's not that bad.
Not only would it be, I guess modern day physical pen test sort of
with a crocodile.
Really, get your caveman on, like be really physical.
I actually really like that idea. We're going to have to look into crocodile rental.
Ladies, I've been doing this for years, and I've never traversed any crocodile-infested anything to break into a building.
That's the point. This would be the...
Everyone else has done it.
Okay.
That's the point.
Michelle, you find a way to get crocodiles delivered to Bally's, and you get Bally's to agree. We will have crocodiles.
I am Googling crocodile rental Las Vegas as we speak.
This is Las Vegas, which is the land of anything you want.
Okay, I probably shouldn't have said that. I probably shouldn't have said that. She's going to have crocodiles at Bally's. Okay, so if you don't want to come and traverse crocodile-infested, I don't even know if we can call them waters, floors at Bally's, then maybe you want to sit through the rest of the SE Village, which is our SECTF, both Friday and Saturday. We already have our 14 contestants scouring the internet for OSINT on the targets, and we have chosen 10 high-quality speeches. I got to say, this year, the turnout, and Michelle can back me up on this, it was pretty ridiculous. We had so many speeches to choose from, and we only have 10 slots. So choosing good ones was really hard because there was a lot of really good stuff submitted.
And about how many people do you think can come into the room and listen, just so that people know how they can plan their day? Like, if it's seating's limited, then...
That's a good question. So last year we had about 3,000 square feet. This year they gave us another whole room in addition. We're estimating it to be about 3,500 to 3,800 square feet. And we still, yet last year, had lines out to the elevator. So we try to keep things circulating, but we do have a space problem. Some people come, literally, like Michelle, right? People come and they sit in the room and never leave.
Absolutely. So I think planning is one of those necessary items to be getting into SE Village. I think we continue to be a popular event, so just be warned.
Also, our speeches, do you want to come and get them? That starts at 4 p.m. both Friday and Saturday. That's 4 p.m. So we hope to have the room full for them. And then our SECTF for kids kicks off Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Nice, bright, and early for the parents. They love us for that. And that paints and torture goes all day. And then, of course, we end with the podcast on Sunday morning, which is just always a barrel of joy. Always. Here's the deal. DEFCON SE Village could not be happening if it wasn't for the help of my team, which we have more than just the people that work for me. We have people that literally volunteer their time, fly in, and do nothing but work for us for like 4 days straight. People like Jim and Billy Boatwright and Dan and Evan and Paul and Thomas and Anna and Ashley. These people come in and they just basically slave away for us inside the room. So we can't thank them enough. But we also have a group of sponsors that have helped us cover some of the financial costs for gifts and swag and things that we give away during the SE Village. So this year, Trusted Sec again sponsoring us. I think this is like their third or fourth year sponsoring us in the SE Village.
So if Dave was here, we could actually thank him, but since he's not, we're just
mentioning his name.
He can receive your thanks in virtual
thanks, Dave. Virtual thanks. One of our best and favorite partners, Fishline, offers amazing fishing tools. They are also sponsoring us this year, as they did last year. Our longest standing sponsor, Pindrop, has been sponsoring us, I think, almost the whole time we've been accepting sponsors. Pindrop Security.
What does Pindrop do for those who are new to the scene and don't know Pindrop?
I should just give you the URL, pindrop.com. That's what you should go to. But what they do is they really focus on vishing security. It's kind of, they issued an interesting report this year on vishing attacks, analyzing them and looking at them. And they've created some tools that can help protect companies from phone-based attacks. So quite interesting. Yeah, really interesting. So check them out. And then our newest sponsor is a partner from Japan, Ashgent. They are a Japanese company that we partnered with to help bring social engineering into the Japanese market, and they are sponsoring us this year. So without their help, we would not be able to get anything done, really, there, to tell you the truth. It would just be Michelle and I, and then we would hate each other and probably kill each other one day in. So thank you, everybody. Okay, now let's talk about our guest, because I am super, super excited about this guest. She is Amy Herman, is our guest, and she wrote a book called Visual Intelligence. Her area of expertise is the art of perception and observational skills. And I don't want to say too much more, because we're going to get Amy on now, and I think this will be a really fascinating podcast and interview guest. Let's get her on. Amy, really great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
So maybe before we start, you could just start off by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you got into this field of perception and observational skills.
Sure. I took a very circuitous route to get here, and it only underscores the idea that the first job that you take in life is not the one that you're wedded to, which is what a lot of people want to hear. I like to say that I'm a recovering attorney, and I'm also an art historian, and I like to think that I've taken the practical aspects of each of those disciplines and come up with this program where I train people from across the professional spectrum to enhance their observation skills by learning to look at works of art. I studied art undergraduate, art history, I should say. And like a lot of people who didn't know what to do with their careers, I went to law school, hated it, was a practicing lawyer for 5 years and said, I can't do this the rest of my life. And I packed my bags, I moved to New York City, and I got a job in a museum. And I have never looked back. I found my way into museum education, went back and got advanced degrees in art history. And I was lucky enough to have one of my first jobs at the Frick Collection, where I started this program, The Art of Perception, for medical students. And that was back in 2000. And the idea was quite simple. It wasn't even my idea. It came from Yale. And the idea was, let's take medical students out of the clinical setting, out of the hospital, bring them to an art museum, teach them how to analyze works of art, so that when they go back to the hospital setting, they'll be better observers of their patients and better communicators. And it was such a simple prospect. It worked beautifully. And we did it for a couple of years. And I was out to dinner with friends one night. And one of my friends said, why are you just doing this for medical students? There's a much broader applicability here. Why aren't you doing this for homicide detectives? And I thought, well, why am I not? So I called the NYPD, said, I have a great idea. They got it. They bought it. And that was 14 years ago.
So what made you start with medical students? Like, what was the thinking that you said, that's where I should begin this kind of a course?
I wish I could even take credit for it. One of my volunteers at the Frick Collection came up to me one day. She said, did you hear about the wonderful program at Yale? I said, no, what's the wonderful program? She said, I don't know, but I heard they have a wonderful program. So I called my colleague at Yale and I said, what are you doing? That's great. She said, oh, you must be talking about our medical program. So I went up to New Haven, observed the program, and with their permission, started a version of it, really based on their idea of looking at works of art and then looking at photographs of patients and using the descriptive and analytical skills. Don't tell me what's wrong with the people in the paintings. Tell me what you see. And it really worked beautifully. And the medical students responded in such a way. And I thought, you know what? We could use this in a lot of contexts. And that's when I called the police department. Luckily for me, it ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And I got calls from all over the world after that Wall Street Journal article. And they all said, oh, come teach us how to see like you did those cops in New York. I can't teach anyone how to see. I'm not trained to do that. But what I can do is I work on the skills that I talk about in each class. I call them the 4 A's. Every new doctor, every new lawyer, every new police officer, every new nurse, every new parent actually uses these 4 A's to assess, to analyze, to articulate, and to adapt based on their observations. So that's what I try to do in this program.
How did it work? Like, what was the results after you started with the medical students?
After we started working with the medical students, by sheer numbers, we asked them to sign up for the class. And then it became a lottery. And then it became one of the most popular classes at the medical school. And we would ask the students at the end of the course to just write a 1-page description of how this program would change their practice. How did they see themselves differently as doctors after learning to look at works of art? And it was amazing, the things that they came up with. And we really stressed, don't just reach for the chart when you walk into a patient's room. Look at your patient. What's on the table next to them? Are there cards? Are there flowers? Are they wearing their own pajamas or the hospital pajamas? What kind of observations can you make before you look at the MRI results or before you look at the vital signs? And it's amazing how much information they had available to them. And I like to think that we put humanism back into the practice of medicine. There's the art of science, the art of medicine, and the art of looking. And I think we really worked with them on the art of looking to get as much information from their patients as they could.
Can you come teach my doctors that in my area?
Don't we all have a story about how a doctor just reached for our chart and never looked us in the eye and said, how are you?
Yeah.
So that's what we were trying to get to in medical school.
I think this is a really interesting point, Amy. And I think when I was looking at your bio, I was kind of under the impression that it would help with diagnostics, diagnosing illnesses. But you're talking more about sort of a human connection then.
I am. It certainly can help in diagnostics because one of the underlying premises of this program is to teach people to be precise communicators, to communicate with precision and clarity and objectivity. And so, when someone says, to give you an example, and I'm a layperson, but to say, well, the patient was breathing strangely. What does that mean, strangely? Deeply, shallow, making noises. We need to choose our words carefully. And while diagnosis is not my primary objective, making better communicators out of medical students is. So I think in the end, that certainly can help with more precise diagnosis.
Great. Makes a lot of sense.
I also I never want the perception that this is sort of a touchy-feely, how do your patients feel? It's the real tactile skills. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? And how do you translate that into your care for the patient?
Have you ever had anyone who is sight impaired take your course? I mean, how do you adapt it for people who are visually impaired?
Yeah, well, I haven't had too many, but I have worked with people who are vision impaired in the museum. And I will bring them through the museum. And I don't work at the Frick Collection anymore, but when I did, and I worked with sight impaired people, I would use the methodologies that I used in my course, and it would force me to be as descriptive verbally about works of art as I possibly could. And in a place like the Frick, where it's a home, it's not just a museum, I would encourage the people who were sight impaired to be able to touch the marble and touch the stairs and listen to the fountains. And I would walk into a gallery and I'd say, well, this gallery is very crowded because X, Y, and Z. And they'd say, well, we can hear that it's crowded. So I learned about orienting people who are vision impaired, to walking around the museum and looking at art. But I haven't had too many of them taking the course.
We had a social psychologist on, Dr. Ellen Langer, who did a lot of research into something she calls mindlessness, and talking about how a lot of people, like throughout their day, will just kind of go on autopilot, not really observing their surroundings. So it sounds like your work would actually help in that because, from our standpoint, we focus on the human side of security and why people can get hacked, why people are the biggest threat inside of a company. And a lot of it relates to them just not observing their surroundings, not spending a couple seconds to critically think before they take an action that can lead to a vulnerability. Are there skills that you suggest that everyday people can practice that can make them more perceptive?
Yes. One of the topics that I cover in almost all the classes, not just my law enforcement is the idea of situational awareness, both short-term situational awareness and long-term situational awareness. When it comes to personal security and personal safety, short-term situational awareness forces you to know where you are at that exact moment. Where am I? Who's around me? What's happening? How can I escape? And how did I get here? And be able to articulate all of those circumstances. Long-term situational awareness is where you're aware of an ongoing problem, but you haven't wrapped your head around a complete solution. You know about interim solutions. You know that the problem exists long-term. And the best example I can give you, because I do work in the intelligence community, is the problem of ISIS. That's a long-term situational awareness. We haven't conquered the problem. We're well aware of the problem. We know of isolated incidents, but we haven't realized enough in pattern recognition to be able to solve the problem. So I tell people that whether you're a parent or a nurse or a doctor or a law enforcement agent or an intel officer, short-term and long-term situational awareness are really critical to be effective in the work that you're doing.
Do you think, like when you talk about that, one of the questions we get when it comes to our industry, because we kind of promote something very similar, and we get this question a lot where people ask, does that seem to make people more paranoid? You know, having to always think like that, like looking at a room and saying, how do I escape if something goes bad? Do you think that that makes people more paranoid?
No, I think quite the opposite. And I'll give you an example. I took my son to Washington, D.C. this week. I had some work on Capitol Hill, and I thought, you know what, it's summertime, let's go to D.C. And 2 nights ago, we were at the Lincoln Memorial, and it was after dusk, and it was really a beautiful time to be at the Lincoln Memorial, and there were a number of people inside the memorial, and it was very hot. And my first thought was, what happens if there's an attack here? And it didn't make me paranoid. It just made me realize, go stand by your son, keep an eye on him, and know how to get out if you had to. And after I did that, I was able to enjoy the experience. I didn't spend the whole time thinking, oh my goodness, this is a prime place for an attack. I just realized where I was in relation to my son, and how we would get out in an emergency if we had to. And so I think it does the opposite. It's saying, you know what, I'm going to take control of the situation by being aware of my situation. And, you know, I can't turn this off. This is what I do for a living. So I'm always aware. I live in New York City. I'm on the streets. I'm on the subway. I'm always watching, always around, but it actually gives me peace of mind to have that information available readily rather than having no idea where I am and not worrying about it. So I think situational awareness can actually give you peace of mind when you know what you, or at least what you think you would do in a difficult situation.
So it sounds like, so the steps then are, first you have to assess the information that you have and sort of analyze that. And then the next step, I guess, is being able to articulate that.
That's exactly right. And being able to articulate precisely what's happening is harder than it sounds.
That was exactly my question, is that I think a lot of us do the same thing where it's like, I understand a concept, but it really is kind of difficult sometimes translating that into a language that your targets, you know, the people that you're trying to communicate that to will understand as well. There's tons of concepts running around in my head. Whether or not I can communicate that is a completely different problem.
That's a universal problem, because I tell people that you can be the best observer in the world, but if you can't communicate with clarity, precision, and objectivity what your observations are, what good do your observations do you? And this was underscored this morning as I was watching the reports coming out of Dallas. And the mayor was on television, and they said to the mayor, what can we do for you? You know, other than our thoughts and our prayers, what can people in the general public do to help the situation in Dallas? And I was so heartened to hear his response. You know what he said? He said, choose your words carefully. How you choose to portray this situation and what's happening. He said, I'm speaking to the media. I'm speaking to law enforcement. Choose your words carefully. And I try to underscore that in every single one of my programs, because people make bad word choices. And unfortunately, our perceptions of situations and problems and threats come across in the words, in our articulation of the situation. And I implore the participants and the readers of my book to choose their words very carefully. Articulation, I think, is the most important of the 4 A's.
That's actually really relevant to the security community, because we have a lot of very brilliant people in our field, people who see security risks and can break into, from the good side, break into companies and networks and test the security.
Sure.
But they're unable to then communicate that to clients and to companies and to employees. And so we have found that if you're unable to do that, then it really is, like you said, it loses a lot of value if you're unable to communicate what you've found and what you've seen and what to do as a next step.
I think it diminishes your impact as well. And if it's any comfort, I don't know if it's a comfort or more discomforting, but across the professional spectrum, I find that in many, many fields, some of the most brilliant operatives in different fields can't communicate what they're doing or what their expertise is. And so their impact is really dramatically diminished. So, I believe being a good communicator is key in so many different fields. And, I work in different levels of the military and I work at so many different areas of law enforcement. And, the bar is raised every day in the world in security. And how we communicate, not only what we see, but that very dynamic and changing world is key, I think, to professional success.
I keep telling Michelle she needs to learn how to read my mind, but she hasn't done it yet. So I thought that would be a better solution. But
the point
that
is
would be a good solution.
I can read your mind. I just can't articulate what I see in there.
Touche.
Nice, real nice. So seriously, though, because that does seem to be a problem across many different industries, how does one then work on communication skills to communicate what they're observing and analyzing appropriately?
While it sounds drastic what I'm doing, I take people out of their comfort zone. I throw them into the cold end of the pool and I say to them, draw on the skills that you have and swim better than you used to swim. And the way that I do that, in my analogy to throwing them into the cold end of the pool, is taking them to an art museum. Because for 99.9% of the participants in my class, they haven't studied art or art history. So I'm taking them into very unfamiliar territory. And I'll put them in front of a painting or a sculpture or a photograph, and I'll say to them, tell me every single thing that you see. Small details, big picture. What do you see? What do you think is missing? And what are 3 questions that you would come away with that were not answered by your visual analysis? And for so many people in law enforcement and intel, that's what they need to be doing on the job. But because we have a certain level of complacency, I've been doing this for 20 years, we assume so much. We think everybody in the room knows what we're looking at, so we don't articulate. But when I show them works of art, they figure, well, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm going to say everything that comes to mind. And when the session is over, I remind them they're not looking at art for a living, but I want them to take every skill that they use today in the art museum and bring it back to the real world.
That's an interesting point that you brought up, which I see, and I will say I even do this myself, is that once you become comfortable in your job role, and you're with people of a like mind, you just assume that everybody kind of understands things the same way. So
absolutely, that's how you lose your edge, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and you communicate less effectively because it's like, well, they all know this, right? Because we're all doing the same thing. How do you avoid then communicating in a condescending or too easy, I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but
maybe a biased way.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I tell people to err on the side of inclusion and err on the side, not zero knowledge, because if you're working with people in a similar field, of course you can make assumptions that we all have a similar level of knowledge. But I tell them to take a step back. And if it costs you 5 seconds or 10 seconds, you can say exactly these words. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and we all understand that X happened. And what happens frequently is not everybody is aware that X happened. Just because you know it doesn't mean that everyone knows it. So the takeaway I tell people is don't let your assumptions get in the way of your observations. In the very worst case scenario, you're going to say something that everyone knows. But just think how much value is added if you add information and someone didn't know it, and then you get your multiple perspectives, which make for more informed decision making. So there never has to be an issue of condescension in any way. In fact, it's the opposite. There's assumption we're all on the same plane. We all have the same level of knowledge. But I just want to reiterate to make sure that everybody knows X, and then you move on. So you're all on the same playing field.
That's fascinating. In your work, in your research, and working with people from all different backgrounds and now different industries, have you found that upbringing, childhood trauma, or other things affects people's abilities to be perceptive or observational in certain circumstances?
Absolutely. I talk about perceptual filters that we have, and those filters come about through our upbringing, through our education, through our family, and through our experiences. So the last thing I want to do is tell people, take all your perceptual filters away, because that's how we behave. That's where our biases come from. That's where our norms come from. But what I want to do through my work is make people aware that they are biased, make people aware that they are using inferences and they are making assumptions, and that's okay. But they need to step back and make sure they're justified in using those assumptions and inferences and acting according to those biases. Because if we all took our perceptual filters away, it would make us much less interesting than we are. That's what makes us different. I see things differently than you do because we grew up in different circumstances, or we went to different schools, or we have different education. That doesn't make our opinions or our conclusions any less valuable. They're just going to be different. And I need to recognize, as do you, that we see the world through perceptual filters. So when we're looking at works of art, and someone will say, well, the man in the painting looks depressed. Someone else will say, well, what do you mean by depressed? Do you mean sad, or do you mean clinical depression? And then they'll have a discussion about the choice of words about what they see. So by putting it in the context of art, it takes them out of their comfort zone, but also recognizes that we're all looking at the world through these filters.
Fascinating and so applicable to our industry. I think one of the things that maybe it shouldn't anymore, one of the things that kind of always surprises me is we have these guests on from so many different areas of research in different fields, and we hear things that are almost identical to our work. So it's just interesting to see how it all kind of applies, but how much we can learn from looking at things like this.
You see these different student populations, from these different slices of life. Have you seen differences amongst the groups in terms of ability to pick out details, to articulate, to analyze? Because, clearly law enforcement is a different field than, say, medical. And so they're doing kinds of different things, but you're teaching them, or you're at least exposing them to skill sets that are consistent. So do you see differences, or do you generally see individual differences as opposed to population?
No, I do see tremendous population differences, and I can even break it down further. I see different approaches to the 4As between law enforcement and intel. And it's always fascinating because frequently it has to do with a time element. When we have exigent circumstances, you're going to analyze and assess and articulate differently than when you have the luxury of time to ruminate on a problem, to solve the problem. So I do notice many differences in populations, in medicine, in law enforcement, in different disciplines, but I also notice differences in gender. That probably won't surprise you guys, that I find as a whole, women are much more detail-oriented than men are. Men will arrive at the big picture faster than women will, but women will be much more precise in their descriptions of details. So I find that within populations, you can have very different ways of practicing the 4As, but also by gender. And I don't break it down by age, because people that have been on the job for 20 years are sometimes less observant for the reasons we articulated before, that they've seen and done it all, and so that they're going to miss that edge.
That's not a shocking piece of knowledge either, right? I mean, that women have more detail.
No, I don't think that shocks anybody whenever I tell them.
I wasn't like, oh my God, really? No way.
No, unfortunately, that's what most people say. They say, yep, not a great shocker there.
But it's interesting to see how it works, right? Because getting to the answer quicker doesn't always mean more preparation.
That's right. That's exactly right. And, some of those decisions that we make quickly, I think we have a lot of information available to us. So when we make a gut judgment, it's frequently, there's more information than we realize available to us.
Some of the things that I often hear or read is that in communicating, when you're trying to get some points across, maybe there's key words we should avoid, or words that we should avoid using because they actually hurt our communication ability. I think you talk about this a little bit in your book. What words do you say that we should probably avoid?
Now, I don't want to make any of you feel bad for having used these words in the last 20 minutes of our conversation.
I probably use them all.
I ask my participants to refrain from using 2 words during my class, then when through the end of the day, through the end of their week, and when they go back to the job, I ask them to refrain from using the words obviously and clearly. And the reason I ask is because, very simple reason, we live and work in a really complex world. Nothing is obvious, and even less is clear. And I find that those words are loaded with assumption. So when you say, well, obviously, it's a case of X, what if I don't know why it's obvious? So I prefer that people say, Instead of saying, obviously it's a case of X, they're going to say, well, it appears to me to be a case of X because of Y and Z. That way,
I'm such a violator. God.
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt you before when you said, well, obviously in law enforcement. And what I wanted to point out is when you take obviously and clearly out of your sentence, it really doesn't change the meaning of your sentence. It's just this added assumptive, well, it's obvious that it's this. And in watching the news in the last 24 hours, how much is obvious about all the violence that we've been experiencing? What's obvious about it?
Nothing.
Nothing. It's so nuanced and it's so embedded in our culture and perceptions. There's nothing obvious and nothing clear about what's happening in our country right now. So I tell people, avoid the words, and it forces you inherently to become a better observer.
Well, let's say you are a person who, this is part of your vocabulary now, and you hear this, or you read your book, and then you want to make the change.
Right.
Is it disruptive to communication or wrong? Like if you're in mid-sentence and you say something like, obviously you should have known that, or something to that effect, to pause and then put a new word in?
I think it's really valuable to do that because it shows the listener that you're choosing your words carefully. I would say, if I said the word obviously, I'd say, you know what? Let me step back. Let me rephrase that. Instead of obviously, say, I've noticed this to be the situation because I perceive this and this. And that way it gives the listener a clearer path to how I got to the conclusion that I got to. Because I hate to bring politics into it. I mean, look at all the inferences and assumptions and biased things our politicians are saying. And I want to say to them, how did you get there? Walk me through it. What were your observations that got you to that conclusion? And so I tell people, take that step back all the time and say, you know what? Let me rephrase that. And often they will.
I actually really like that approach because it's not as condescending, right? And it says, I'm owning the words I'm saying, and I'm not saying that you missed anything. But this
Absolutely.
is clearly my position.
Absolutely. I'll give you another example. This happened recently. I was speaking to a group of attorneys at a university. We were looking at the picture, that very famous White House picture of the national security team on the morning Osama bin Laden was killed. You know, that picture where there's a general in the chair and the president and the vice president. And I said that the president had been relegated to the back of the room. And people jumped on me and they said, he's not relegated at all. Relegated has racist implications. Why did you choose that word? And I said, let me step back and rephrase that. I didn't mean any malintent. I just meant that normally the president is in the front of the room and he gave up his chair to the general who was working on the computer on this national security initiative, and the president moved to the back of the room voluntarily. And I had to step back and rework the words that I was using because it was clear to me that they had taken offense at my choice of words.
That's really interesting because the natural inclination would maybe to be go into defense mode and defend why you said that with an explanation. But doing the whole let me step back and re-articulate that is very humbling.
I have a feeling I'm going to be stepping back and
You know what, though? I think it makes us better thinkers because if you go to use those words again, you're going to stop before they come out and you're going to say, you know what, this didn't work last time. Let me take another approach. And yes, it's humbling, but it also shows that you're real. We're all human and nobody's a perfect communicator. And observation and perception skills are works in progress. They're never mastered. They're never mastered.
That's a really fascinating point. I never really thought of that. Because as you were telling that story about you and talking with the folks when you said relegated, I automatically put myself in your situation and can feel myself getting defensive and then wanting to explain, well, this is why I said that. I didn't really mean anything. I wasn't trying to be uncool about the president. I wasn't trying to say anything negative. That probably would have just fed the negative emotions in the room because you're defensive.
It comes back to the point that word choice is so important. Because if you're thinking about being defensive of your word choice, you know what? Let's just pick another word. I do that with my son all the time. He always says, well, that's not what I meant. I said, then tell me exactly what you meant and we'll go from there. Words are really very powerful and so is art. And I don't see myself, I love my teaching. I really do. I'm probably very good at it, but I don't see myself as this great teacher. I see myself as a connector. I'm connecting my participants, the power of their words and the power of the art and putting it together to make it professionally relevant for them. I'm the connector. In the context of homeland security, I work in security at many different levels, at the local level, and then I do a lot of work with counterterrorism initiatives. And nowhere is it more important when we're talking about the big picture and the small details that feed into that big picture to make good word choices. Because we're talking about new material all the time. The bar is raised every day. I know we keep saying that, but the world of security is changing you guys know this more than anybody. It's changing so quickly that to be able to keep up with that, we need to be conversant and just choose our words very carefully when we're talking about the big picture and the problems we're facing in the big picture and the small details that we've noticed that go along with it.
Yeah, you know what's fascinating to us about the security world, and there's no way to really change this, is security, whether it's from computer, network, human, physical, it seems to be a very reactive industry because we're reacting to the attacks that the bad guys are thinking up. And it's really hard to be proactive because you don't know what's coming next. You don't know the next virus, the next ransomware. It's like we sit there and we look at this and our customers will say, well, what's going to happen this year? Like, you hate to even say this kind of an answer, but I don't know. We have to wait and see and then figure out a way to fix it, figure out a way to defend because they're coming up with things as quick as we can come up with fixes to fix the old things.
To put it in the broadest possible scope, that's what's happened since 9/11. 9/11 raised the bar to a place we never thought we'd have to go, that we couldn't even conceive of. And so that's where hopefully the concept that I'm teaching of pattern recognition, how we weave together incidents and hacking and security threats, how we weave them together to help us better be able to predict. That task might be impossible to see everything. If we really articulate our pattern recognition and what we see in a pattern, maybe it will equip us to help what happens in the future. And as I said, that bar was raised by 9/11 and it goes up every day in so many different security contexts, as you said. So I have my work cut out for me in that sense, but it's a real challenge for me to always come up with images, works of art that address these exact concerns.
Do you suggest that the same principles that we just talked about apply whether you're communicating orally or written?
They do, because thanks to our digital world, we are texting and emailing as much as we're talking, if not more. And in my program, I work on written communication skills. And if I'm working with analysts who do more writing than speaking, I'll certainly put more of an emphasis on the written word and communicating with clarity, precision, objectivity in the written word. But I focus on both because I find, and since you can't see me, I'm going to describe what I do. I point to my eyes and I say, something gets lost from here. And then I point to my mouth and I say to here, and then to typing on a keyboard to here, and to texting with my thumbs. Something gets lost from eyes to mouth to fingers to thumbs. I don't know what it is that gets lost, but something does. And that's what I'm trying to redress in my program. So yeah, I find speaking and writing are equally important.
And do you think this is even more of a challenge and I hate to classify it, but in a millennial age, like my children, they're so used to communicating in 140 characters or less that it's like drawing them out to have a conversation that doesn't involve Imager or something is a task.
It takes a tremendous amount of effort, as I've discovered as a parent. And when we were coming home from Washington yesterday, we were on an Amtrak train between Washington and New York. And my son was on his phone and the conductor came up to him and said, "Young man, I like to talk to some of my passengers. Can you put that phone down for a minute?" And my son engaged in a 15-minute conversation with the conductor. And I said, you know what? What a great exercise. And that's what I do. I'm not trying to belittle technology. They need their technology, as do all of us. But we need to use it creatively and we need to use it most efficiently. And that means occasionally putting it down and looking up and engaging in conversation, because nothing will ever do away with conversation completely. We're always going to have those interpersonal skills. So I think it's finding a balance between the texting and the emailing and the instant imaging to putting that down and looking someone in the eye. It hasn't become obsolete yet.
I know that you don't break it down by age group. I want to know if you saw a difference in between a younger generation, those who grew up with technology all the time, and those who are older who might have utilized more visual observation, because I have a lot of young nieces and nephews. And for them, it's always head down looking at the device. And I notice that people who are on the device, they're not necessarily less observant, but they're just less aware because they just have so many other things going on.
Well, what I've noticed, and that's exactly right, that's a really good articulation of a generational issue that exists. But again, I hate to keep going back to the art, but when I take my groups to the museum, and I would say I only take about 40% of my groups to the art museum. The rest I have to do on site for security reasons. They can't all be in a museum together or the group is too large. But when I take them to an art museum, and when the group is younger, I notice this, if it's, young bankers or young med students, they're all on their phones immediately. They're on their phones, indispensable, can't be out of touch. And then I say to them, okay, you have 5 minutes to look at this work of art. You have 5 minutes to discuss what you see with your group. I put them in groups of 2 or 3. You have 5 minutes to discuss what you see, what you observe, and how you're going to present that to your colleagues. The phones disappear. They absolutely disappear. They put their phones away because they realize what I'm asking them to do requires a set of eyes, a brain, and a mouth, and nothing else. And I say to them, you can't look up the artist. You're not allowed to read the label. Tell me what you see. And away goes the technology. Yeah. And they come out of the session saying, wow, I haven't had to do that in forever. I said, well, it's a valuable exercise. And then they think they're all art experts. It's really quite hilarious. But I do that because we need to exercise those parts of the brain. And as I said before, we're never going to get rid of our digital technologies, nor should we. But that doesn't mean we can let the other parts of our brain atrophy completely. The best in the intelligence world, I hear this over and over again, the best intelligence weapon we have is a pair of eyes, because that's what starts the ball rolling. Then you can use all the technology, but you need a pair of eyes attached to a human brain. Nothing is more powerful when it comes to seeing.
Obviously, clearly, there's always something to work on. I was just kidding. I was trying to fit every word you said not to use in one sentence.
It is a work in progress for me as well.
Yeah, Michelle and I will probably be spending most of the time saying, let me back up and fix that again, or say that
there
again.
You go.
I'll be doing that a lot now. Thank you very much.
Good. Glad to hear it's working. Just in our conversation, I'm glad to hear it's working.
This is a fascinating topic, and you have mastered your articulation of your field, so it's very interesting to listen to you.
Thank you. I'm thrilled that I was able to do it without visual aids. I live in such a visual world. I'm glad it came across without any paintings.
And what's funny is Ping was saying that right before we got you on, is that wouldn't it have been nice to do a video podcast so we could see you, because the whole idea of visual intelligence and perception without being able to see the other person is a little odd, but...
Well, I'll tell you one last thing about visual perception and visual intelligence. In the back of my book, there's a picture of me where they have the author picture. And I do not look like that anymore because happily, I say this gratefully, I'm a cancer survivor. I am well and healthy, but I had 1.5 years battling cancer. I lost my hair and now I have very short hair. I love my short hair, but I look nothing like the picture on my book. And it's very striking for people when they'll say, you can't be Amy Herman. You don't look like the person on the book. And we attach a visual image in our brains because when someone's looking for me at an airport or they're looking for me to be on the stage, I can see on their faces. And I say to them, yes, it's me. My hair is different. And it's fascinating to watch their facial recognition.
Wow, that is interesting. We do a lot of things on visual. Ping's making fun of me because right before we got you on, I said, look, guys, we can't be late today because Amy looks punctual. And they laughed at me and they said, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know. Just looking at her pictures online, she looks punctual. Well,
I want to say that your perception is almost correct. I want to say that I'm punctual 90% of the time.
It's that picture you have on your Art of Perception website, and you look very punctual. And I'm like, this is a person we can't be making wait, so we have to keep our time frames going.
That's hilarious. I love that.
So
that's good.
Amy, if people want to know more about this work, if they want to know more, I know they can buy your book, Visual Intelligence. I see they can get it anywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. When did that come out, by the way?
That came out, it was published on May 3rd of this year, so it's been out for about 2 months.
Excellent.
But if they want to read more about the training or the sessions that I run, they can go to my website, which is artfulperception.com. And then there's a site dedicated to the book, visualintelligencebook.com.
Excellent. We'll put both of those in the show notes. Now, do you use social media? Can people interact with you on Twitter or things like that?
They can, yes. On Twitter, I'm at Amy Herman, AOP, for Art of Perception.
Excellent. So one of the things we always do when we ask our guests when they come on, because we have avid readers that listen to this podcast, 83 months now, we've been asking the same question. Is there any books that you would recommend? And they don't have to be on this topic. It can be on any topic that you find fascinating, but any books that you've read that you think other people would enjoy?
Yes. in addition to my own book, I have two recommendations I'd like to make. One of the books I'm reading now, and it's fascinating about observation. It's called, not surprisingly, it's called Forensics. And it's by Val McDermid. The subtitle is What Bugs, Burns, Prints, DNA, and More Tell Us About Crime, which it's just fascinating. It's about noticing the small details and how much they do tell us about the big picture, which is fabulous. And the other book that's in the medical context, but it's for the general reader, it's called The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. And what I loved about the book, it's about the articulation about which we were talking so much. The Checklist Manifesto is how doctors make a checklist before they operate, making sure that everything is in its proper place because we take it for granted. Have you washed your hands? Are your gloves on? Did you hand sanitize? And all the things that need to be done for surgery and how that carries over to professional relevance and everyday lives. So I thought the Checklist Manifesto was fascinating, and I love this book, Forensics by Val McDermid.
Excellent. Thank you for those two suggestions. That's wonderful. I will add those into the show notes. Thank you for those recommendations. It's been a fascinating podcast, though, so I can't thank you enough.
It's been wonderful talking to all of you. Really a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amy. We really
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, ladies, I don't know if there's any more we can say, but that was phenomenal.
Yeah, I think she's pretty awesome.
She is pretty awesome.
She knocked it out of the ballpark and very applicable to our industry.
I think it's going to go down as one of the better podcasts for us. That was she was so well spoken and so informative. It was such a great conversation.
I think we have a lot that we can learn from her.
Yes, I'm going to stop using the word obviously and clearly.
Delete from vocabulary.
And now, wait, what's the way she said? How do you correct it if you say it?
Let me step back.
Yes, there it is. Let me step back and rephrase that. I'm going to have to practice that one in the mirror or something. A lot. If you want to follow us, we got SOC Engineer Inc. That's our corporate Twitter. Human Hacker is me. Sultry Asian is Michelle. And she started that all on her own. She loves that account. It's always her idea. So it's a pretty epic story, really. Ping, since you're here, it's VLKYRI. That's your Twitter? Okay. So, and we're not even going to give Dave's out. I'm not going to even say it's Hacking Dave just because he's not here. He wasn't with us.
Even though you said it.
Even though I said it, darn. But I will say it was happy to hear while we were getting our guest acclimated, while we were telling her about the show, she indicated that she was not a Hornsby fan. I'm not making that up.
We liked her that much more.
Yes.
As a result.
Yeah, it made us really love her even more so. Social-engineer.org is where the podcast lives. Social-engineer.com for more information. If you are still on the IRC network, we have a channel there, which does get active at times. It is on irc.freenode.net, channel social-engineer. If you like the outro and intro music, it is Clutch, Gone Cold. You can check them out online, too. That's 83. Guess what next month will be? The live one at DEFCON. So if you're there, we will see you live at DEFCON next month. See ya.
Swan boats and daisy chains. Can't seem to recall any given name. I see the footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that only a moment or many years ago? My heart is gone